it's overwhelming, but it's also our jobs.
Our job is only going to get harder.
It's worrisome.
This is something that's unprecedented.
Now is not the time to be a cowboy. No one has anything to prove. We're all in this together.
Hello and welcome to Reporting from the Frontline of the Pandemic. I'm Kayla Martin and I'm here with Dustin Wlodkowski, Maine BRoll reporter for NECN. Thank you, Dustin, for being with us here today.
No problem. Happy to help out.
What's it been like reporting out in this? How has the way that you work changed?
I think the general workflow of what I personally do every day as a bureau reporter has not changed that much. It's the little things we're doing to try to keep people safe and try to do all the same social distancing things that everybody else is doing. So in the morning, I've always sent story pitches between 7 and 8 a.m., except now they're all about COVID-19 and its impacts on Maine. And just the same as we would on a regular day where the stories are all different stories about Maine, this time they're about the virus, and we'll pick the most important one that we think will resonate with our audience on a given day. Rather than going to the building, I literally hop in the Ford Explorer that my photographer and I have, and that's it. That's our office for the day. What changes is how we do interviews. We've always done interviews every once in a while over FaceTime or Skype or Zoom like this, although Zoom's a little bit new for us. But we try to do in person if at all possible. That's the preference. Now, I often will offer interview subjects a chance to do the interview virtually because we want to give them the option of feeling comfortable and safe if they would like to, or, I just think it should be the first thing that we say to folks is, hey, we're people before we're journalists, and so we want to accommodate. Next thing we'll do then is if they are up for an in-person interview, we have a giant boom mic, one of the audio boom mics that you would see on a more advanced news production shoot or for a film shoot, and we will social distance from people while we're doing our MOS. So we'll be 6 to 8 feet away from them and be able to conduct the interview. That was a new piece of equipment that was given to us with this. And I would say the other steps of the day, once it gets to writing and editing, are all the same, but when I get in the car, I'm wiping down all of my gear, my laptop, the microphones, all that stuff gets cleaned and wiped down. We try to get the car as sanitized as possible because we are essential employees. We have to be out there traveling, but at the same time, we don't want to be responsible for spreading the virus just like everybody else. And we're taking that to heart as people who live in the community.
Especially, you're out there every day, you're going to different parts of Maine to see a bunch of different demographics of people, different age ranges, I'm sure. How do you make sure that you keep yourself safe as well, and not just the people that you're around?
It's all about taking the same advice as everybody else. There's no special guidance that we have in terms of anything secret or there's a magic way to avoid this virus. Everyone is trying to do their best, that I know, at least in our community of reporters up here, because I work with a lot of reporters from the MEC stations in Maine and the other stations in Maine, to social distance. And we work together, for instance, to figure out the best way to do the press conferences with the state. So when the state does a CDC briefing or the governor speaks, a week or two ago, we were at a different building, a state office building, in a conference room. There was no screening process formally. We were spread out in the room, but my photographer was in there with me. The other photographers and reporters were all in this room that was fairly large. This past week, we've taken the extra step of moving that briefing into the Maine Emergency Management Headquarters. Photographers take the feed outside, roll on it on their cameras, or it gets fired back to the stations. We, the reporters, go inside, and there are chairs marked in locations that are exactly 6 feet apart. And before we're allowed to go in that briefing room and sit in those chairs, we actually have to get our temperature checked and answer the same health screenings that a lot of people are having to do to go into other buildings that need to be protected, especially from the virus. So after that screening, we take some hand sanitizer or wash our hands, and then we're allowed to go in that briefing room. So that, I would say, is probably one of the biggest things that we had I never pushed to have the briefing moved, but I was in the room when the conversation was had about how do we best do this to not only protect ourselves, but to demonstrate social distancing for everybody who should be doing it.
Yeah, I was curious how they would do that, because typically with a presser, it's a bunch of journalists, camera people, side by side, cramped into a small room. So it's good to hear that there's taking precautions there as well to keep everyone else safe.
I mean, my photographer and I, we are, again, people in the community first. And we want to set a good example for everybody else based on what we know about COVID-19. And that means washing our hands, it means social distancing, it means doing all the things that these public health experts are saying to do, because it is that important, and it's reflective of the role that we play in the community. Is that, to be in the community, you have to follow the rules of the community.
For sure. And so I know that hasn't changed too much on like the process of how you cover your stories, but how you find stories, has that changed at all?
Not really. I really don't think it has. I think that a lot of what's changed is all of a sudden there are 1,000,001 press releases. There's more than I can really, I don't want to say there's more than I can keep up with, because I do manage to keep up with it. But as these closures of Acadia National Park today, I just saw an alert that I still have to verify about the state parks. It sounds like they're closing too. As these museums and other public spaces have closed, as businesses have closed or modified their operations, all of this is coming from the usual places, but it's at a volume that I'm not used to. I go on Twitter, I go on Facebook, I read the press releases, I call people that I know, ask them how they're impacted. I think of places like paper mills, like there's a toilet paper factory or two in Maine. So I've called them to figure out if they're ramping up production. And usually the story is more complicated than that. So none of the sourcing is different, but the amount of newsworthy items coming from different people has maybe increased 9 or 10-fold, especially last week when the initial changes and restrictions were being put in place on a lot of people in New England.
So there's definitely a lot to keep up with, for sure. How do you manage like multiple stories and this kind of like workload?
Luckily, my email inbox generally functions as an organized place that I can turn back to. So as I'm adding phone numbers or trying to jot down ideas, I'll save those draft emails that have my scratch notes on things. And then I can search back and find, oh, what's this? As long as it doesn't get deleted a month from now. But I try to use that as a database that is not intrusive to the process of getting the story done, because there's not a lot of breathing room in my day generally, because I always have to book in a little extra time to feed our package back, because we're never in the station to just dump it in. It has to be sent over usually a Wi-Fi network or cell phone network, and now a lot of times a cell phone network. So I'll have to book in those extra 20 to 30 minutes just in case that's on an ideal day, to get the package back. And so there's not a lot of time for me to have a nice organized notebook and write down everything separately as I'm interviewing somebody on the phone and getting my photographer to shoot something that we need and multitask at the same time. The email inbox comes in handy because I'm able to have these little things that don't make any sense to anybody else, all this gibberish about my day in one place, and it's findable, and then I can go back and find these cell phone numbers of people I've FaceTimed to have for later to do follow-ups. I'd say that's one of the most resourceful tools. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way of organizing, and if you're organized, like it makes it for an efficient day. Is there anything specific that your station has like told you specifically that you have to do to take precautions, or is it just the same like you mentioned earlier?
I think the overall guidance has been to follow the rules, follow the instructions of local officials, public health, law enforcement, otherwise. Also to use your best judgment. You have a gut instinct. If something makes you uncomfortable, this is not the time to cave and do it. And well, I mean, one, it never is, but especially now, you should never feel like if you have a concern that you can't go to somebody and talk about it, because this is such a big, unprecedented situation that things will even come up as we go that we don't anticipate. So I think the biggest rule is to, keep yourself safe. It may sound really silly and really basic and really simple, but that's the overall rule that I feel like from a newsroom perspective has been implemented.
Yeah. And you're talking about like how unprecedented this is. Something like this hasn't happened before. And so every day, would you say it's kind of like a breaking news sort of a day?
Yeah, it feels like that. It doesn't feel like it in the sense that there is an immediate event that has happened and we are rushing to catch up to it. It's more like there is a story that is developing, but the volume at which the story is developing makes it rise to a crazy breaking news story. Like I said, some stories that I have, you're trying to parse through all these different bits and pieces of information that are coming from all these different platforms. And what we've done lately is, because there's so many little things that are worth mentioning, we'll end up kind of pulling one bit of information from one source, and then you'll have a list of 9 that you go down, and your story is basically one of those French really layered cakes. And it's not just a here's what happened, here's a crime scene, this. It's like, well, in Portland, they're shutting everything down. The governor is saying this. In another city, they're doing this, and the tolls are still being collected. And all of that somehow gets wrapped into one piece. I think we end up maybe doing those stories more often than some people are feeling like we have to, because we cover one state in a regional news organization. And so I have to give the best picture of Maine that I possibly can through this crisis. That's just a function of the job. So we end up maybe doing more of those, here's a round robin look stories more than most people. But I would say that you come home feeling like you went to a breaking news story, even if you physically didn't.
I'm sure it can be difficult to try and understand an entire state at a time. Basically, there's a bunch of communities within one state, and trying to figure out what's happening up maybe in northern Maine and how that could connect down to southern Maine and kind of wrap that all together.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have a partner in News Center Maine that's a statewide news organization, and we could pull file video from them at just about any point. And we know where it is. I used to work there. I know where a lot of the video is myself. And what's difficult is we can't just go and quickly ask somebody to go grab it for us. It's in the building. We have to call someone, get them on a moment that they have free to go pull that archive footage for us. I did tell my photographer before we were not allowed to go back in the building anymore that we need to pull some generic items. So like the hospitals, bus stations, different Maine cities and towns that we mention a lot, generic BRoll. I had him pull all of that stuff ahead of time so that at least in the field we'd have things that maybe we'd commonly use, but there's going to be a day like today where we don't necessarily have everything at our fingertips that we want. I don't actually work for the company that owns the station. I'm not technically part of their news team, even though they run my packages. Because of that, there are days where even before this virus, we would be out in the field by ourselves. Ken and I, my photographer, we just see each other and that'd be it. We'd file our story back, end of the day. This just feels like that over and over and over and over again. And sometimes during a breaking news event, there would be a week where we wouldn't be in the building very often. I can actually only jump back to September when we covered a fatal natural gas explosion that killed somebody, injured a lot of firefighters. And we basically got in the car and drove to that town 2 hours away, and that was a whole week. This is like that to a different degree, but it's a second week now, and it may be a third week and a fourth week. And I think maybe that sensation of, gee, I haven't seen the people that I know as my coworkers, and a lot of them are also my friends, at all in the past few weeks. Like, this is weird, but because I am used to at least a week or two's worth of coverage, fairly independent from those guys. It hasn't sunk in that we aren't going back anytime soon, at least it seems.
So with your job, since it's so different and specific, we've seen on TV a lot of adaptions of people being in their homes, being on their computers, using a lot of like screen recording footage to fill their packages. You're still like out and recording out in the field. Do you think that it would be like different if you were in the building? Do you think there would be a lot more adaptation that you would have to do?
Yeah, if we were in there, I suppose we would have to socially distance from everybody else to some degree and really be cautious about what surfaces we were touching, which we are in the car, but there's only the two of us. So as long as the two of us have disinfected everything and sanitized everything that we possibly can as we use it and keep track of that and not get forgetful, then all of our germs are contained. If we were going in that building, we would really be a lot more cognizant of what surfaces we were touching. In some ways, it may end up, it's hard to say because I haven't done it, but in a hypothetical scenario, it may be more difficult to report in there because you're really trying to scrub everything down and make sure that you minimally impact people and stay far away from your producer because you don't want to get anyone sick by accident just by being asymptomatic.
For sure. I feel like in journalism, like our industry is always evolving and changing and adapting in itself. So do you think that there's anything that we're doing right now that we've adapted that we'll use even after the virus is gone?
I think the changes may be more on the way that we do interviews, kind of like this, where before I was always kind of hesitant to ask for a FaceTime interview, or I didn't even know what Zoom was until a few weeks ago, but a Facebook video interview or a Google chat interview, something like that, because there's so much work on the other person's end that Ken and I can't necessarily help with right away, or my photographer, or whoever it is at any given point. But the point of this is there's a lot you can't control when an interview subject is trying to set up a FaceTime and doesn't know how to do it. Now, because so many people have been mandated to set up video conferencing apps, this is a second nature thing. And so we may be more likely to say, hey, if you can just set up that Zoom thing that you had set up for the COVID-19 outbreak, let's do an interview that way because it'd be a 2 to 3 hour drive to get to you and we can't make it there in time and make deadline, or you won't be able to meet us by the time we get there because you got a meeting coming up. So somewhere where maybe I would have said, either we're not going to do this interview or we're going to do it over the phone with a graphic, we might be able to get video interviews out of that. We don't have a lot of answers about the long-term impacts on the industry yet, I think, because we're so ingrained in what's happening right now. And there's so much still happening around us, and we're still adjusting to this unprecedented change.
As a reporter and getting B-roll, you're not always going to have that file footage like you didn't have today. And what if like you can't go to a certain location? How do you manage to kind of like still fill that space, get that footage without being able to go to that place?
A good example would be a piece I did on an island. Actually, we did two pieces on one island that had basically said to anybody who wasn't a full-time resident at this particular point in the crisis, they may have walked this back now, but don't come here. This island said, please, we don't have the resources to treat somebody medically for COVID-19. It would cause such a strain on us. Don't come. But obviously we weren't able to go to that island for a couple of reasons. One, as people, before journalists, we weren't going to go there and accidentally bring the virus to the island. I mean, I don't think either of us have had any of the symptoms. I've been screened multiple times now. We, as far as we know, haven't been around anyone. We've really tried to take this seriously, but we don't know. And we don't want to find out. So we weren't going to go. And then we went back in that file archive that I was talking about. That was one of the things we didn't have offhand, because I didn't know that we would need video of that island. So we had to request it from the folks at WCSH. They uploaded a video of that cut to Slack, which is the way that they do a lot of their inter-office communication. And then we downloaded that because we have a Slack thing of our own. And then we exported that and then added it as BRoll into our piece. We did the same thing with a piece on another island shortly thereafter. One thing that's been helpful with this crisis is people have been issuing edicts and orders and recommendations, and they all come out in documents that are posted on Facebook and online. So we can take screenshots of those and put those up as useful tools. And normally, you know, too much of that is kind of not great video, but this crisis is so impactful and the things that are in these documents are so impactful that they're actually useful pieces of video. So we combine all that together, all these things we can find online that are graphic illustrations of what's going on, and then the file video. You can basically go anywhere if you can get some good sound virtually, and then you add that all together, you have a pretty decent story without having to move very far.
That's really interesting of how, you know, you can make a package, come up with a story without even having to be there. Because like our job is all about bringing people to a place, you know, like letting them inside of that tent. And so for us to be able to do that without even being able to go there ourselves is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it helps that I've been in Maine now for about 5 years. I've been to a lot of places that we're talking about, but years ago, I have been to both of these islands. One of them was 4-story, and actually the second one, I had shot that video myself years ago. So we're using file video that I shot when I was an employee at the other place. And having that knowledge makes it way easier to paint this picture of these places for folks, because not only are you writing about them as if you've been there, because you have, but also you're able to think back, who did I meet that might be a good person? Like, oh yeah, maybe this, I'm pretty sure I met this selectman. I think he knows a thing or two about lobster fishing because he was a lobsterman at one time. So it's little things like that that, you know, I'm finding myself lean on my own breadth of knowledge about this state in this, and that's making these illustrations of these places that we can't get to easily or have to get to virtually now much easier.
For sure. I know journalists that are just getting into the field now, students, this is a bit of a different world for people that have been in the field and for people that, you know, have been studying this for 4 years and now have a whole new way that they have to try and like learn, even though they just learned this pre-existing way. So what advice would you give to upcoming like broadcast journalists? That's
a huge question. And again, I'm speaking, all of these answers, I'm speaking for myself. I know I'm wearing this logo jacket, probably shouldn't be, but that's okay. I think the biggest thing is to absorb everything that's going on around you and be curious. That's a really simple thing to do, but having a natural curiosity to find out everything you can about a situation, in this case, this virus outbreak, is crucial. Because if you can do that, you then have this quick ability to recall information that you know, or have a vague idea of what it was and know who to ask to get it confirmed. And that is something that having a breadth of knowledge about a subject, whatever it is really, really helpful. And especially if you have a breadth of knowledge on a wide variety of subjects, even just a little bit, because then you work on these other skills like writing and videography and the production of a news story. And what a good news story is always going to change. What good editing looks like is always going to change. Photography changes as well to some degree. I think we're going more towards film-looking type stories very slowly. Definitely before the virus, there's a lot of push to do things in a more artistic storytelling manner. But those are all things that you can, I think, see great examples of and then take away little bits and pieces from people who are masters at those crafts. You cannot teach and get better at curiosity. You have to, or maybe you can, but you know, if you're starting from that point, you know, and you can show that you know a lot about a subject, that you're interested in a subject, and that there's a baseline of a reason for people to listen to what you have to say, and that you have something interesting to say, not giving an opinion, but you're just in the way that you pick stories, then combine that with the good photography and production skills, and you'll be able to adapt to the uncertain future that we don't know or what's going to happen. Like if television is not the medium everybody's watching everything on, it goes to something in streaming, and clearly there's a huge demand for video. You're prepared for that, but you're better to be prepared for that by being a curious person and knowing that shift in the industry is happening.
What makes a good journalist is their curiosity, and we all kind of, at least what I think of is, we all want to be journalists and got into journalism purely based off of wanting to share other stories and giving a voice to those people that don't have one. And so that's kind of our fundamental tool, if you will. So no, I think that was a great way of explaining it. Of as long as we keep our most basic passion and understanding of people, of communities, and wanting to help tell their stories, that's the most important part.
No, and I think it's critical that that happens. I think this is because at this particular moment, we don't know what's on the other side of this crisis. We don't know what it means for just about anybody in any business. Maybe Netflix is in good shape. But even then, at a certain point, you can't produce right now shows the way you did before, because you can't gather people to produce a high budget, really expensive, awesome show. So we don't know what that next thing looks like. And I guess in this interim where you have a class of graduating seniors who are journalism students, and they're thinking, not only was I going into a rapidly changing business where it's really, some of the best people with the smartest ideas are working every day to figure out what it is we should be doing in journalism to get great content. Now this virus happens. I think you have to go all the way back to the bottom, all the way back to the basics. And I think that's kind of what overall it's about, being a person too. And so if as journalists we're going back to the basics of being curious, then as people we have to go back to the basics of helping each other and being as safe as possible in the middle of this very complicated crisis to which it seems, from what we're being told from the public health experts, has for now a very straightforward solution, but it's a daunting one, which is to stay apart from each other.
This is a big change for everybody, no matter your age or where you are in your career or in your life. So is there anything else that you would want to tell us that you want people to know?
I think what we're doing right now is really important. I do think there is a reason why we have an essential role, why we're considered essential employees, why we have pieces of paper right now that say we're critical to supporting the communications infrastructure, because it's important for everybody to know at all times throughout this crisis. Now you can parse it out so you have good mental health, but it's important to be informed. And that makes you feel really good when you go to work every day. And I think that because there's been, this now brand of the media on the internet that's pervasive, for better or for worse, it is, whether you like us or not, a demonstration of why we're here. That we're here to help you understand what's going on, or at least if we can't help you, we present factual information because we're trained to do so, and it's an essential service that's protected by the Constitution. And I think that's a good thing for all of us to be reminded of, not just the people who are watching or reading, but also for the journalists, that you do have this responsibility to inform, and then that should then inform your personal way that you carry yourself and your candor, so that we have a great symbiotic relationship with the public. I think for a lot of people, we haven't necessarily lost that, but there's just so much more media for people to consume from people all over the world with various levels of training. And in this particular instance, there at least is a clear demonstration that if you just look at any of, you know, the numbers of people who are now tuning in or clicking on Facebook posts or whatever, that they're appreciating the work that we're doing, or at least giving it a look.
Yeah, I don't think there's probably a house with a TV that hasn't turned on to figure out what's going on. And especially like people that are older, that, or like that's the only way that they get news of what's happening out in the world. It's very important to them, because how else are they going to know what's going on? What do they need to know? And you know, it's changing every day, and there's always new things that we need to learn about. And I think people that didn't have news notifications on their phone before definitely have them now. So it's definitely essential. Thank you, Dustin, for taking the time to talk with me today, and for taking the time to continuously to work to keep us safe and informed. And thank all of you for watching this episode of Reporting from the Front Lines of a Pandemic. I've been talking with Dustin Wlodkowski, a Maine bureau reporter for NECN, and I'm Kayla Martin.